All right, today I'm going to be talking about stilts. Now, stilts are one of my favorite tricks. I would say I'm pretty good at them, so I think I'm pretty qualified to talk about them and to do this video. These tricks are going to get increasingly harder, and I'm kind of going in an order that I think you should learn these tricks in. So for each trick, I'm going to give an example, and then I'm going to kind of talk about each trick and give some tips for each one. Now, before we get into the first trick here, you probably want to be comfortable with lunars first. That's probably something you should kind of have down, both regular and inward lunar, because that feeds directly into the first trick we're going to talk about, which you're probably guessing is just a pull-up stilt and a pull-up inward stilt. So there's a regular stilt and there's an inward stilt. Now what I do for pull-up regular stilt is I kind of have the string hole to the left, holding it with my other hand. As I let go of that, I kind of let it do a little bit of a spin, not too much, but let it just kind of spin on its own as I pull it up. And as I pull it up, the big cup should be relatively straight. And just land it on stilt, just like that. Again, straightness is key here. You want to make sure you have your airplanes down as well, super straight. And then for inward stilt, what I do is I hold the string hole towards me with the big cup facing to the right. What I do here is I kind of just let the Ken drop. I don't do a spin at all with my other hand. I just let it drop. And then I kind of pull the Tama, or I pull the Ken at this angle right here to kind of bring it into that inward stilt position. Use your knees. All right, so the next trick that I think you should learn after just pull up stilt and pull up inward stilt is stilt over valley. So what this trick is a regular stilt. You hop over the valley to inward stilt, and then a spike of your choice. The key to this trick is just a pretty small hop. You don't want to give yourself too much air. You don't want to throw it into the air like that. I mean, it's still possible, but the smaller the hop, the easier this trick is going to be. And then once you get consistent at this, you can kind of go back and forth like this. Again, keeping it as straight as possible. This trick is going to be crucial for when you're going for lines that include both a stilt trick and an inward stilt. For example, like a stilt flip over the valley, inward stilt flip. Now this next trick, I don't think it's as important as stilt over the valley, but you still want to get these down. This is a one-turn stilt. Just like that. So another trick you probably want to learn before one-turn stilt is a one-turn lunar. Obviously the Ken release with your other hand is huge for this trick. What I do is I kind of start with the string hole facing to the right, kind of bring my hand in this position right here. As I let go, I let it spin to the point where the big cup is facing me. And once that big cup is facing me, that's when I do the pull. And if you do the pull at the right time, it should be relatively straight, and the stilt should be relatively easy to land. All right, the next trick we're going to talk about is stilt flip, which looks like this, and an inward stilt flip, which looks like this. Now, if you've learned one turn stilt, this trick is going to come a lot easier because you're already kind of comfortable with a flip to a stilt. Again, for this, I like to have a pretty concise, tight flip, not too lofty, keeping it as straight as possible. When you're learning this, you're going to want to use a lot of knees. What I do is I kind of track the big cup as it comes around. So I track where I'm going to land on that stilt. And again, keeping this as straight as possible is the key. You really want to focus on a extremely straight push forward, because any slight push to the side is going to make it do a tray. For the inward stilt flip, straightness is still huge here, but of course you're doing an inward flip. It's coming towards you. So what you're doing is you're pulling the Tama towards you. A good way to set yourself up for a straight inward stilt flip is having a really nice pull up. As you can see, the stilt is already like straight in itself. If the stilt was like this, it would make the inward stilt flip a lot harder to get straight. But if the stilt is already straight in itself, it's a lot easier to just go straight back and have, you know, a straight inward stilt flip. And the last trick I'm going to touch on in this first tier of tricks is a stilt inward flip to inward stilt. So this is kind of a similar concept to a stilt over the valley, but of course you're doing a flip to it instead. For this trick, if you're starting on stilt, you're technically doing a backflip. So this is a good introduction to backflip concepts. In terms of tracking this one, I like to just watch the small cup the entire way through. That's really where I put all my focus. You do kind of need to adjust your hand position a little bit because you don't want the spike on the inward stilt to hit you. So I don't know if you can see, but it's very subtle. I adjust my hand a little bit so that spike isn't hitting my pointer finger. As you get more into stilts and continue to do flips, you're really gonna start to realize that straightness is like easily the most important thing. So always make sure that both you're setting yourself up for a straight flip by having a clean stilt, but then also really focusing on doing a straight pull back or a straight push forward. All right, so now we're gonna move into the second tier of stilt tricks here. We're gonna throw all that straightness talk out of the window because we're gonna be talking about stilt barrels. So there's a stilt barrel. All right, and there's an inward stilt barrel. Now I'm gonna be honest, inward stilt barrels, I'm still not great at them. They're still a little bit tough for me. But yeah, let's get into the regular stilt barrel. So the key to this obviously is that you're kind of doing a twist instead of a push. I like to twist to the right like this because that's the same way I do trays, and we'll talk about trays in a little bit. What I'm doing with the tama essentially is just this. It's essentially just a pull with my pointer and middle finger. It's not an actual twist of the wrist like that. It's more of a motion with my fingers, as you can see. So what I do is I give it a little hop, and as I'm coming up from bending my knees, that's when I engage in that twist motion. Do a little twist, let it get some air, spot it up. This one's really hard to track. These are a lot harder to track than a regular stilt flip. So it's just a small rotation. If you're doing doubles or triples, obviously you want to give it more twist, but when you're doing singles, just a very slight motion. A really crucial part to this trick is, of course, keeping it flat like this and not having any tilt this way or that way. How you can kind of perfect that is having a straight kind of up and down motion. So if you're coming up and you release the stilt barrel when the Ken is like this, that's not really ideal. You want to keep it as straight as possible, straight up and down as possible. So as you can see, when I come up and I do that stilt barrel, I'm trying to keep that as straight as possible so that it stays as vertical as possible. Now for an inward stilt, what I like to do is do a twist like this. Now for me, this twist is a little bit harder, and I do actually twist my wrist more than I do my fingers. So what I do is this kind of motion right here. Now you could try doing the other way, but for me, I find that a lot harder, and I can't really get the Ken flipping straight that way. Or straight like vertically, you know? So for this twist, I kind of just twist my wrist a little bit. Again, you want to come up as straight as possible. I put a little bit more loft on this one than I do with the regular stilt. So again, for these barrels, vertical straightness is really the key. So you want to come up straight, really be delicate with your twist, spot it up, and then catch it on the way down. All right, so now we're gonna kind of combine two of the tricks we've talked about. We've talked about the stilt flip and the stilt barrel. We're gonna combine those now into a stilt tray, just like that, as well as an inward stilt tray, just like that. So lunar trays should be a trick you should have down before you learn this as well. For this, the diagonal push is even more important than a lunar tray. So really the key to this trick for me is just imagining where I'm pushing the tama, really envisioning it. That's what I found for trays in general, is what gets you the most consistent at them. So when I'm doing this tray, I'm not just mindlessly flicking my tama over there at that angle, that 45-degree angle, you know? What I'm doing is, before I do it, I'm literally envisioning like an imaginary arrow right at that 45-degree angle. And because I'm envisioning that and imagining that, it gets me a lot more consistent at actually pushing at that perfect 45-degree angle. Same thing applies for an inward stilt tray. I've talked about this with my inward lunar tray tutorial. I kind of like to reposition my wrist a little bit, so I don't have my wrist in a normal position like this. I kind of twist it like this so that I can do that 45-degree angle with my pointer finger, if that makes sense. It's more in a straight line that way. So again, I imagine that imaginary arrow, and I try my hardest to get a really perfect 45-degree push. Next flip we're going to talk about is a stilt backflip and an inward stilt backflip. Here is a stilt backflip and an inward stilt backflip. All right, so for the stilt backflip, I mean, we kind of already touched on this with the 1.5 to inward stilt, but you're pulling towards yourself with the tama. It's the opposite direction of a regular stilt flip. What I like to do is give this one a little bit more loft, because this, for me, is personally a little bit harder to track than a regular stilt flip. So giving myself a slower flip, more time to spot it up, really helps. Your thumb can get in the way a lot with this trick, with the spike hitting it. So you really want to make sure you have that thumb kind of towards the bottom of the tama. Make sure that is really out of the way. This one, you're going to need lots of knees, of course, lots of cushion. Straightness is, of course, key here as well. I find with stilt backflips, straightness is even more important, and maybe it's just because I'm not as good at them and they're harder, but again, really emphasizing that straightness. With an inward stilt backflip, you're pushing away from yourself, outward. Again, keeping it as straight as possible, a bit more of a lofty flip, just like that. For me personally, inward stilt backflips are a little bit more difficult. So I like to do even more of a lofty flip than a regular stilt backflip. What I'm tracking as the stilt backflip comes around is, again, where I'm landing, so the top of that big cup. All right, so next up we're gonna move on to our last kind of section of tricks here, which is throws. Now the first throw we're gonna talk about is a stilt 1.5 swap, 1.5 back to stilt. Here's an inward version of it. So a trick you really wanna have down is a 1.5 swap, 1.5 back to airplane, because it's the same idea, same technique. The spin still applies. You're just doing it from stilt. So you're gonna pull up the stilt, 1.5 flip. As you do the swap, you wanna give the tama a spin so that that hole stays on the top. As you catch that ken, swap once again, catch the tama. If you have a really clean spin, that hole should still be on top and it should line you up to catch that stilt. One huge thing about this trick is patience. You don't want to rush the throw. You really want to give yourself enough time. Get good contact of the ken. Don't do like a half-assed catch, you know. Really make sure you have contact and then do the throw. Once you catch that tama, obviously it's kind of just like a stilt flip. Obviously you do need to think about the hole a little bit more. If it's not perfect, you might have to rotate it to get it to the top. Again, that spin really takes away those inconsistencies. Again, patience, spin, and you also want to make sure that you have a consistent throw on each 1.5. So the 1.5 out should be relatively the same speed and same height as the 1.5 throw back to stilt. You don't want to do a super lofty 1.5 and then a super quick 1.5 back to the stilt. You want to keep them relatively the same. Now moving on to the inward stilt. This one, honestly, I'm still not great with. You still want to give this tama a spin. It's a little bit harder to spin off an inward throw for me, but I can still do it, as you can see. In terms of catching the ken on this one, this is the really difficult part for me, because what I like to do is kind of catch the ken when it's kind of facing straight up like this. That gives me more like leverage to do an inward throw after I catch it. So if I catch it like this, it's a lot easier for me to do a clean inward throw. If I catch it like this, where the ken is already like pretty much flat, I don't have much leverage to do that inward throw. So again, I try to catch it as early as possible, and where the ken is a little bit more straight up like this. Straightness is really difficult with this one. I guess it just depends. If you're already pretty honed at those inward throws, this one's gonna come a little bit easier. But for me, as someone who's not necessarily honed at those, I really have to concentrate on catching that ken early. And again, see there, that wasn't a straight throw at all. And really focusing on a straight throw. All right, so let's move on to our last trick here, which is gonna kind of cover some tap concepts. There's a lot more tap tricks you can do to stilt, but this will be just kind of the first one and the only one that we talk about. So the first trick is a stilt, tap back to stilt. The inward version looks like this, right there. So this is a good way to kind of introduce yourself with taps to stilts. For this trick, for the stilt version, what I do is a slight inward, I guess backward throw is what you could think of it as. So a slight backward throw. As that Ken is rotating this way, tap the bass cup to make it do a regular stilt rotation. It does one flip, comes back to stilt. One thing you want to pay attention to is having enough of a backwards push or inward push to set yourself up. Because if I don't give myself enough, then it'll look like that and I just won't have enough leverage to give myself a good tap. So you really want to make sure you're moving it far back enough with that inward throw to give yourself enough leverage for a good tap. For the inward version, this one's honestly a little bit easier for me. Again, you're doing kind of a stilt or an inward stilt backflip push. As that comes around, tap the bass cup. That'll make the Ken do an inward stilt flip. Does one rotation, comes back to inward stilt. Again, you want to make sure you're giving yourself enough leverage. So you don't want to throw it straight up and then do the tap. You really want to emphasize that back motion into the tap. Just like that. Straightness, of course, is again key. So you want to set yourself up for a straight tap. You want to make sure there's no wobble this way or that way. Really straight. Because of course with these tricks you have less control over how straight that flip turns out because you're not just simply pushing, you're doing a tap into it, you know? So you really want to set yourself up for a straight flip just like that. So yeah, those are 10 stilt concepts to learn first. Obviously with each one, like the stilt flip, you can do doubles, you can do triples, just like that. But yeah, hopefully this gave some insight into kind of some stilt concepts you should be learning, some stuff that you shouldn't forget, and hopefully some helpful tips for each one as well. Let me know if you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.